Kol Nidrei has been associated with controversy since its inception, and we're here to delve deep into its intriguing story. We're going to unravel the criticisms it faced, the defenses it inspired, and the persistent misconceptions that have colored its long history. But that's not all. We're also going to embark on a journey to trace the theory that links Kol Nidrei to the Jews suffering under the Spanish Inquisition. We're coming very soon to Yom Kippur, and over the past number of decades, perhaps even over the past century, there have been many sermons in many synagogues across North America that have gone something like this. The rabbi would pose, it would be a Kol Nidrei sermon, and the rabbi would pose a question. And the question would be, we're gathered here to open the services of Yom Kippur, and so it's an awesome moment. And indeed, the Kol Nidrei tune is a very haunting tune, and it does meet the enormity of the moment. But then, if we take a peek into the text of the Kol Nidrei, the English text of the Kol Nidrei, we find ourselves dealing with vows and oaths, a legal formula. And so the question is asked, why does this get such a serious tune? And why does this get the prime real estate of the opening of Yom Kippur? So it's two questions. One, how does the tune fit the words? And number two is, why is this text the opening of the Yom Kippur service? In fact, for many people, it's a disappointment. They were looking for something that's going to be about repentance or about remorse or about unity with God or something intense. And instead, we get this legal formula. To put the question in another way, we all do Ataras Nedarim. And no one would imagine that Ataras Nedarim, you're going to get up and start doing it to immersive Nigunim. It just seems incompatible. This is the question that is asked. And then the sermon pretty much continues into the next step. And the next step says we're going to be able to understand this by learning about the origins and the history of Kol Nidrei. And that's because, and here it can go in one of two ways. I'll give you two ways. One way is as follows. Because the origins of the prayer, the origins of Kol Nidrei comes from the time of the Marranos, when Jews were forced to convert to Christianity, and they lived outwardly as Christians, but inwardly as Jews. And throughout the year, they had to make multiple pledges and promises and oaths that they're good, loyal Christians. And so they did this. And so then it came Yom Kippur, and they all came to shul, or the secret shul in their basement or in a cave. And now fragt sich the Shaila, am I really able to face God? Am I really able to join in a minyan on Yom Kippur? I'm such a terrible Jew. So the first thing I need to do is I need to proclaim and affirm my Jewishness. So how do I do that? By saying all these oaths that I made to the Grand Inquisitor, all of these are null and void. The ones that I made in the past are the ones that I'm going to make in the future. And with that, he sheds this outward, this external layer of non-Jewishness, and he feels comfortable going into the Jewish community. And this is why the piyut of Kol Nidrei was nischaber. This is one way of this sermon going. Another way of going is to change it a little, is not to say that the piyut of Kol Nidrei was written by them or for them. After all, in the text of the Kol Nidrei, we don't really see any indication for that. But a small modification is that the text of Kol Nidrei was made for whatever purpose it was made. However, the Marranos, when they came to shul, they heard a different text. A regular Yid heard a regular text, but the Marranos, they heard Nedarim and Shvuos for their own experience, and so therefore they started treating it very seriously, more so than for the regular people, also Ataras Nedarim. For the Marranos, it was deep stuff, really serious, so they put this niggin to it, and then that niggin was a niskabel. This is how many of these sermons have gone on. And then the Hoira, what's the lesson? So the lesson is that this is really our story, because in a sense we're also often faced between what we really want on the inside, the neshama, and then on the other hand, what society imposes upon us, or what our surroundings impose upon us. And we come to Shul on Yom Kippur, and what's the opening moment of Yom Kippur should really be about? Exactly that nekuda, Kol Nidrei ve'asarei, all these pledges and oaths and allegiances that I have to chitzainistic things, to external things, to things that are secular things. I shed all of those and I say those pledges are nothing, it's not the real me. And with that I open Yom Kippur. And that's a very powerful message. And now all of a sudden, Kol Nidrei is very, very meaningful for me and for you. And we are inspired, and and we're able to go into the tefillah of Yom Kippur by Nacht. Okay, as I said, this has been stated and restated many, many times by many different rabbis over the past 100 years or so. And what I want to do today is I want to trace a little bit the history of this history, and that is the history claiming that there's some link or association between the Marranos and Kol Nidrei. Where does this appear? How does it develop? Who are the people saying this? Alongside a more comprehensive shir about the Kol Nidrei as well. So, the first sefer that I think we could call a traditional sefer that belongs or that is traditionally found in shuls and batei medrash and in shuls and in batei medrash and in shuls is this sefer by Rabbi Avram Eliezer Hershowitz. Here's the title page. Not that you're going to see anything majestic over here. It was printed in 1917. It's called Oitzer Kol Minhagei Yeshurun. It came out in multiple editions. As far as I can tell, this is the first edition of this book. And it has haskamas from many of the Gdolei Adar. So for example, it has a haskama from Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan Spector. He had already passed away by then. But he has a haskama in the beginning of the Sefer from him. He has a haskama from Rabbi Shlomo HaKohen of Vilna. So these are some of the Gdolei Adar are giving haskamas to this volume. So on page 74, he writes as follows. The reason why we say Kol Nidrei in a tune that is really emotional, but whereas when we read the text we don't see anything emotional about it, nothing here really should be eliciting any tears. Because the Marranos of Spain, the conversos of Spain, they would come and hide out in caves on Yom Kippur to daven. They would remember when they would recite Kol Nidrei, they would remember Shvuosayim, Vinidreim, which ones? Their Shvuos and their Nidarim, Shenishpu Vishenadru Lahatzoididim, the oaths that they made to the Tzoididim, to the inquisitors, to the Spanish government. And these Yidden, hearing Kol Nidrei, they had in mind that they want to nullify, they want to annul all these oaths that they made to the Inquisition. And he doesn't finish the sentence, but it seems to be saying, and so therefore they sung it in a very emotional way, and that's where the tune and the haunting tune of Kol Nidrei comes from, and that explains why it's an emotional tefillah. This is what Avram Eliezer Hershowitz says. He then concludes saying very cryptically, Valdas hakol v'goymer im avaryonim. What does he mean by this? Before Kol Nidrei we say, Aldas hamaka and Valdas hakol, by God's agreement and by the community's agreement, we're permitting ourselves to daven with the avaryonim. Why are we saying this? So he explains, because what happened was the Marranos came and they were running into caves to daven, and maybe there were some regular Jews who were leading the service for them, and so they were like, we could daven with these people who are Christians all year, is this okay? Yeah, Aldas hamakim, Aldas hakol, the onamatirin lispalal ima varyonim. So the varyonim are the sinners are the Marranos, and that's also connected to this particular text. This is the passage that Rabbi Avram Eliezer Hershowitz presents in Oitzer Kol Minhagei Yeshurun, again printed in 1917. He has a source. The source, right after the word, I didn't put it on your handout, I forgot to include it. But right after the last word, it says in parentheses, Lekutei Tzvi. Lekutei Tzvi, Sefer Lekutei Tzvi. If you go on the list of Svarim, there are numerous Svarim that are called Lekutei Tzvi. But he gives us a footnote. Let's read the footnote, the star of what this Lekutei Tzvi is. So he writes as follows. Ba Lekutei Tzvi, the author of this book, Lekutei Tzvi, Noilad Be'ir Moilov, B'shnas 1815. Was born in the city of Moilov in the year 1815. Umeis Be'ir Glukov, 1888 Lemisparim. And he died in Glukov in 1888. So we have dates and we have a city. Vida and no Shazah Lekutei Tzvi Einoi HaLekutei Tzvi HaYadua Mikfar. This is not the well-known Lekutei Tzvi. It's the other one. Okay, can you please tell me who it is? Can we get a name here? Who is this person? He doesn't tell us who this person is. He tells us when he was born, when he dies, what city he was born in, and don't think it's the famous one. And well, I don't want to get into who the famous one is. There's a number of very famous Svarim that are known as Lekutei Tzvi, and I'm not sure entirely which one he thinks is the famous one. That's not Negea. But the point is, when you read this passage, something is very, very odd about the way he's attributing this particular story and this particular source. And that's something that we need to crack this code. We need to figure this out, because remember, this is the source that he's bringing for this Kol Nidrei type of story. But in order to get there, let's take a little bit of a detour and let's talk more broadly about what our sources say about Kol Nidrei, some of the controversies associated with the Kol Nidrei, because indeed Kol Nidrei has always been, from day one, associated with controversy. That's the uniqueness of this particular tefillah. So let's do that, and then we'll circle back and we'll hopefully clarify this particular point. The earliest sources that we have talking about Kol Nidrei comes from the period of the Goinim. So for example, there's a tshuva of Rav Nitrunoi Goin. Nitrunoi Goin, it's not a name that I say every day, but he was the Goin in Surah in the 800s. So there were two main yeshivas in Bavel during the times of the Amoraim, and then later into the Tkuf of the Goinim. One was in Surah, and one was in Pumpadisa. And each one was led by someone who was called the Goin, Rosh Yeshiva's Goin Yisrael. That was the title that they had. And so more generally, this is known as the Tkuf of the Goinim. So one of the Goinim is Rav Niturnoi. Sometime in the 800s is when he's living in Surah. Look what he writes. He writes as follows. Mesechnes Nedarim, ein nishnis b'shtei yeshivas hayom yemei Hoshana. We have stopped learning Mesechnes Nedarim for a century already. Meaning since the 700s, we're not learning Mesechnes Nedarim anymore. V'kach Amar Mar Rav Yehudoi Goin Nehoira Ba'alma. And here is the light of the world, Rav Yehudoi Goin. He was a Goin in Surah 100 years earlier in the 700s. That he already said, Anan loy garsinon nidarim, we don't study this tractate anymore. V'lo inon la'asar ulahater ba. And we don't know how to do, to paskin, whether it's le'isr or whether it's leheter. Loy neder v'loy shvua. But what he means here when he says they don't do a heter in nidarim is as follows. The Torah we know has dinim, when a person makes a shua on neder, you need to keep it. There is a concept of nullifying a vow that we read about in Parshas Matos, and that is that a father has the ability to nullify and make null a vow uttered by his wife or by his daughter. Okay, but that's it. The idea of getting rid of a neder in Psukim and Torah, that's all we see. The Rambam tells us that we already see in Chazal that there was also Torah Shabbat Peh in this area. What was a Torah Shabbat Peh in this area? That a person has another exit hatch, another escape hatch. What's this other escape hatch? He go to a Chacham, and he can tell the Chacham, by the way, I made a neder that I'm going to eat pasta every single Tuesday. However, had I known that pasta is really not good for me, the way my doctor told me, so then I never would have made that neder. And so therefore, I want to be that you should retroactively say that the neder is not a neder because it wasn't done bedas. A neder can only be a neder bedas. I had flawed das. Why did I have flawed das? Because I didn't have full information. Had I known what I had now, I never would have done it. And then the Chacham listens and he says, macholach, 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 and this is called hataras nidar. What we're learning over here is, Rabbi Yehuda Goin is saying, we stopped learning Mesechus Nedarim. We stopped this project of allowing people to do this, although it's a din min ha-Torah, hataras nedarim, we stopped doing this. We'll soon see why. We don't do, not in the yeshiva and not anywhere else, to do hataras nedarim, loy b'Rosh Hashanah, v'loy b'Yom HaKippurim, not Rosh Hashanah and not Yom Kippur. We heard that in other places. It's not entirely clear where these other places are, but in other places we heard they say Kol Nidrei ve'esari. We didn't see our teachers doing this. What do we have over here? We have a conversation that is going on in the 800s in Bavel, and what happens is it's a voice saying some people do it. Some people, not clear who, some people are doing Kol Nidrei. We don't think this is a good idea. Not because Kol Nidrei per se is not a good idea. The whole project of Heter Nedarim we don't have. We stopped learning Mesechus Nedarim in the yeshivas Number one. And number two, b'chlal, on a regular Tuesday, if someone comes to be mater neder, we don't let it happen, and we don't do Kol Nidrei. Other people are doing Kol Nidrei, we don't like it so much. So at the very least, what we're able to see from here is at the very beginning of Kol Nidrei, the earliest sources that talk about Kol Nidrei are talking about it in a way of a controversy. It goes without saying, Kol Nidrei is not mentioned in the Mishnah, Kol Nidrei is not mentioned in the Gemara, not the Bavli or not the Yerushalmi. So the first source is this source in the Goinim, and we see that I can't say exactly when it started, but we see already in the 800s, some are doing it and some are against it. Why are they against it? So there's another Goin, also in Surah, also in the 800s, and his name was Rav Hai Goin. Not the famous Rav Hai Goin, the son of Reb Shrira Goin, a different Rav Hai, it was a common name, Rav Hai ber Reb Nachshon Goin. And he writes over here, Ve'ein nuhugin b'shtei yeshivos v'loy b'vavel kula lafan nedarim. We don't do hafaras nedarim in Bavel. Why? Here we get the reason. Sha'anu chafetzim lahachmir b'nedarim v'chol shekem b'shvuos. We want to be machmir in this area. Sometimes we know that there are rabbanim who feel that there's a certain weakness in a certain area in Yiddishkeit, and we need to plug in this breach, and we need to fix this gap. And this is what was happening here. We want to be machmir in this area. It seems that maybe there was a problem, some sort of societal problem that was going on with Nedarim, and it was happening too often, and people were taking it too cheap, and Hataras Nedarim was being relied on too often, and this was viewed as a crisis, and so therefore cold turkey is stopped. We're not doing any of this. And he also goes on to say, so then what do we do on Yom Kippur? He says on Yom Kippur we have a special tefillah. What's the tefillah? The tefillah is Rachmana, dear God, Galya Kamach, it is revealed before you. The leis the mofrei nadrei, the leis the shari isari. We have no one to annul our vows because we don't do it anymore. And so, on the other hand, we made vows, but we don't have ways of annulling them. So Hashem, please forgive us. So essentially, this new tefillah was introduced, saying, "Look, we're stuck. Checkmate. There's nothing we could do because on the one hand we made vows, on the other hand we have no mechanism to be released by it. It's Yom Kippur. Something needs to happen, so we're asking you forgiveness." This is what you have over here. So here we have a few, and these aren't the only sources. We have a number of sources from the Go'inim. The common denominator, all of them, is they're all coming from Surah, the yeshiva in Surah, where they're writing against the use of Kol Nidrei. At the same time, acknowledging that it exists in other places. We have the Ravya, Rebbe Elazar ben Yoel Halevi, who was one of the Rishonim in Germany. His dates are generally from 1140 to 1220. And he quotes another tradition from the Goinim. Uvechuvas Rav Paltoi Goin. We have Rav Paltoi Goin. He's also a Goin in the 800s, but different location. Rather than being in Surah, he is the Goin in Pupadisa. And what does he say? Minhaga didan uveveis Rabbeinu Shababavel. Our custom and Beis Rabbeinu Shababavel. Beis Rabbeinu Shababavel generally was used for the Rosh Hashiva of Surah. So he's saying our custom in Pumpadisa and in Surah, I think that's the right way to read these words. The Chazan says Shechianu on Yom Kippur night. Vishuv Kol Nidrei, after that says Kol Nidrei. That's not our custom today. We do it the other way around. Vishuv Baruch, and after that is Baruch. But the bottom line is, here we see that a Goyin in Pumpadisa is saying that they do Kol Nidrei. He's also saying that this is done in Surah. It's very hard to understand because the sources of Surah say no one here does it. In Bavel, no one's doing it. Pumpadisa is part of Bavel. No one here does it. Some Aratza is far away. In other words, the implication, when you hear Surah speaking, Surah says everyone in Bavel doesn't do Kol Nidrei. When you hear Pumpadisa speaking in the same century, Pumpadisa saying everyone is doing Kol Nidrei. So it's not entirely clear, but some have suggested maybe we're dealing here with a machlokes between these two big yeshivas, whether Kol Nidrei was a good idea or not. However, this is not entirely clear. But what we do know for sure in these sources is that in the 800s, there was chilukei minhagim on this area. There were those who were for it. There were those who were against it. There were those who were doing it. There were those who were not doing it. Why, if they weren't doing it, why weren't they doing it? Because b'chlal, they took the whole program of Hafaras Nedarim. When you go to a chacham and you try to nullify your vow, that whole thing, even learning Masechtas Nedarim, was all put to the side because of this issue that was going on. That was the main reason why it wasn't happening at that time, at least from the way these sources talk about it. Now, those who did it, why did they do it? What's the point? Why do we need to do this? From all things, Yom Kippur is starting, we need to start talking about our Nedarim. What's Pshat? So we got our answer from the Shibolei HaLeket. Shibolei HaLeket is written by one of the Rishonim. His name was Reb Tzidkiah HaRofe, and he lived in Italy during the 1200s. And he writes as follows. Why did the Rishonim, the earlier ones, tell us to do this Kol Nidrei? Because the din is, every sin, if you did tshuva, and only if you did tshuva, Yom Kippur works. There's a machlokes in the Gemara about it. One opinion, Rebbe says, the very presence of Yom Kippur is mechaper. Chachamim say, no. A person needs to do tshuva, and that's the halacha. The halacha is a person needs to do tshuva. So now we come to the following. What is a person going to do about the sin of making an oath and then not following through? If a person promised to give tzedakah, Yom Kippur is not going to be able to help him until he actually gives his tzedakah. If you have an obligation to give tzedakah, Yom Kippur can't grant atonement. And where do we see this? He brings a Mishnah in Krisis. The Mishnah in Krisis says, what happens if a person is chayav a carbon? Let's say a person is chayav a chatas and a asham. And then comes Yom Kippur. Does he still need to bring the chatas and the asham the next day? You say, oh no, Yom Kippur wiped you clean, so you're good. You don't need to bring your karban chatas. No, once you have a chiyuv karban chatas, you have to bring it even after Yom Kippur. If you have a chiyuv of a asham vadai, then you have to bring it even after Yom Kippur. So same thing. If you have a chiyuv to give tzedakah, Yom Kippur ahin, Yom Kippur aher, you still need to give your tzedakah. So what's going to happen? A person made a neder that he's going to give tzedakah, and he didn't give it yet. Now, im adam zachar nidra, if you're going to remember that you made a pledge to give a certain shul a certain amount of money, so then just do it, then you're going to be mekaimoi. The issue is, what happens if someone made a neder that he's going to give a certain shul money, and he forgot? Nadar v'shachach. So now what are we going to do? So nimsa shu anush bavur shur kasher b'nidr v'emakami. He's going to be, so to speak, punished because he made a neder and he's not executing it. Therefore, we need to say this: that if we made a neder and we forgot it, so we don't know how to do it. If I knew what to do, I would do it. But here, in the case I made the neder and I forgot it, so then we regret those nedarim and we're trying to nullify those particular nedarim. So what's going on over here? I'm going into Yom Kippur. You're going into Yom Kippur. You want Yom Kippur to wipe you clean. It's going to leave a stench. It's going to leave this particular stench. If you made a neder and you weren't mekayim it, Yom Kippur is not going to help you. So you got to take care of it. In other words, what is this very similar to? Erev Yom Kippur, there's a minig. They didn't go to other people and they ask Mechila. Why they ask Mechila Erev Yom Kippur? Because they know the din. Yom Kippur cannot be mechaper for Aveda. So therefore, you're like, okay, I know tonight and tomorrow is not going to take care of this problem. So let me go deal with it now. Let me go ask my friend Mechila, and then Yom Kippur could do its magic. So it's the same thing here. Yom Kippur can't help me for the nedarim that I made, that I didn't keep, that I need to keep. So let me take care of it, and now Yom Kippur could work its magic. And so it makes a lot of sense. You should do it on Erev Yom Kippur, just like there's this thing of doing Mechila on Erev Yom Kippur. And so that's why it's done, right before the fast begins, Kol Nidrei, which is the time. This is how Reb Tzidkiah HaRofe, the Shibulei Aleket, how he explains those who said Kol Nidrei. Again, we already saw some people were against it. Some were for it, some were against it. But if you were for it, this is the explanation. All right, so what did we see? We saw controversy number one, the birth of Kol Nidrei. It seems is sometime in the 800s, or at least the earliest sources that talk about it are in the 800s. Some are for it, some are against it. We understand why it was instituted, and that's chapter 1 of our story. The next major point of this story comes with Rabbeinu Tam. And that's because when we look at some manuscripts of the Machzer, there's erasures in Kol Nidrei. The text here, you can obviously all see it from here. I'll send it to you later. There's erasures in the text where it says one thing, and then here's two examples where there's a line going through the words Miyom Kippurim Sha'avar, and here as well there's an insertion in the text over here. These manuscripts date to the 1200s in Ashkenaz, and that's because there was a major textual debate that arose during this time. We have it in Sefer HaYashar from Rabbeinu Tam, where Rabbeinu Tam, he's living in the 1100s, and he passed away sometime around the year 1170. And he writes, in the Sefer HaYashar, it says as follows: Kol Nidrei, da'amrinon beleila yoyim haKippurim, higia Abba Mariz Hatzal. So he actually has from his father. His father's name was Reb Meir. Reb Meir married the daughter of Rashi. So this son-in-law of Rashi, Reb Meir, amended the text of Kol Nidrei. That what? The old text and all of the old sources that survived, the text was Miyoim Kippurim Sha'avar Ad Yom Kippurim Zeh Haba Aleinu L'Toiva. What did that mean? Remember, Kol Nidrei is supposed to be done before sunset. So if you're saying this text, Miyoim Kippurim Sha'avar last year, Ad Yom Kippurim Zeh Haba Aleinu L'Toiva, the Yom Kippur that's starting in 5 minutes. That was the traditional text of Kol Nidrei, where the person was annulling the vows of the past year. Says Rabbeinu Tam in the name of his father that he changed the nusach, that it should be Yom Kippurim Zeh Ad Yom Kippurim Haba Aleinu L'Toiva. It's from this Yom Kippur that's starting in 5 minutes until next year Yom Kippur. Kulaim de'ischaratna b'hu. It's in those nedarim that I want to annul. V'chein ikar, and this indeed is the right way to do it. And if you do it the other way, says Rabbeinu Tam, Einoi ela toya. Why? And so he brings up a number of problems with doing Kol Nidrei for the past. Problem number 1, She'i efshar lahater es atmai. Hataras nedarim you don't do by getting up and just saying something. Oh, I made a neder and I'm hereby declaring it null and void. It doesn't work that way. You have to go to a chacham. You have to go to either one chacham or shloisha hedyotos, so 3 regular people. But the bottom line is it needs to be someone else. What's the someone else in Kol Nidrei? That's problem number 1. Number 2, uvaloi charata demei ikara. You cannot do hataras nedarim without the argument that I said before. Had I known that pasta is so not good for me, then I never would have made. That's critical. Here, we're not doing the Kol Nidrei, it's a blanket statement. That's a problem. Uvaloi yachid mumcha, oy gimel ajaitis. You have to have either, you have to have someone else, this is a point he said before, a yachid mumcha, or 3 regular people. V'oid, another thing, sha'alacha kerapapa. The halacha is like rapapa. Shetzarach lefar taneder. You can't just show up to the chacham and say, by the way, I made a neder, please annul it. You need to tell him what it is. Kol Nidrei, we're not specifying what the neder is. And for all these reasons, he says, we have a big problem saying it on the past. However, that's only if you're doing hataras nedarim. Hataras nedarim is this idea of nullifying past vows. But then there's another sugya in Shas, completely different sugya, that's called Mesiras Maidah. What's Mesiras Maidah? Mesiras Maidah is a person makes a proclamation that any vow I make in the future is hereby null and void. There, you don't need anyone else for that. You don't need a bezdin to respond to anything to that. You don't need a yachid mumche. You don't need a chacham. You don't need to be mefaret to anything. You could just say any neder that I make in the coming year is null and void. You don't have to have charata the meikara that had I known. All these rules don't apply to this. And there is this concept. And in fact, there's a Gemara in Nedarim Daf Chav Gimel Amud Beis that says it is a great idea to get up on Rosh Hashanah. That's what it says. The Lashon is Yamid b'Rosh Hashanah. Get up on Rosh Hashanah and say all the vows that I'm going to make are batal. And that's the concept of Mesiras Maidah. So you have that Gemara. And this doesn't have any strings attached. There are no difficulties in the sugya of Maidah. Hataras Nedarim is really, really complicated. So why should we have our Kol Nidrei be doing Hataras Nedarim? That's off the table. Let our Kol Nidrei be the Mesiras Maidah, the other sugya, which you have in the Gemara in Nedarim. Then it should be done on Rosh Hashanah, not Yom Kippur. Okay, he says the reason is at the end of the day, Yom Kippur, no one is working. What he means by that is batal makol malacha. What he means is Rosh Hashanah, some people stay home because you could cook, you could prepare the meal. Yom Kippur is a blanket isra malacha, and therefore ika knufiya tuva, more people come to shul, and so therefore instead of doing it the Mesiras Maidah Yom Kippur, if you do it Yom Kippur you chap more yidden, and so therefore we moved what the Gemara suggested to do Rosh Hashanah, we moved it to Yom Kippur. This makes sense. Now, Rabbeinu Tam's father did not claim a tradition in this regard. He did not claim that there was some Messiah that said Kol Nidrei. This was based off of his own understanding. In other words, he looked at Shas, he looked at how halacha works, and he saw a major problem with Kol Nidrei. The problems that we spoke about. You need to have 3. You need to have people say Macholach, Machol, or Matul, it's Mutar Lacha. You need to have Charata. You need to be mafar at the neder. All these issues. And because of that, he decided, you know something? I can pretty much keep the same framework. I just have to change the lashon from lashon avar to lashon asid, and then I could save it. I could rectify this problem by taking it away from the sugya of ataras nedarim and putting into the sugya of mesiras maidah. Then the question becomes, so why the moment before the fast starts on Yom Kippur? Like why? Like what's... If it was going on the past, we explained. Just like you need to enter Yom Kippur clean from your friends, so you ask Mechila before. So that's it. You need to enter Yom Kippur clean from your Nadarim, the Avedas of the past year that you're not... Fine. So we understood why that needs to be done going into Yom Kippur. But if it's about protecting for the future, I understand you want to have a big Kehillah, but you can do it later. You could do it after the tefillah. Why does it that mamash have to be at this time? So I think that, I don't know, he doesn't explain, but I think the vart would then be, there's one thing you could do right now that protects you against sin in 6 months from now. It's a great way to enter Yom Kippur. Now usually what can you do? What can you do as Yom Kippur enters? Is there a certain act you could do that protects you against an Aveira and Chodesh Iyar? Not that I know of. But here's one thing you could do. There's one thing that you could do that retroactively or prophylactically protects you against an Aveira from in Chodesh Iyar is this. You make a Maidah, and then like this, if you end up making an Eder and you didn't keep it, so retroactively it's void. Oh, so isn't it a good way to enter Yom Kippur where you did everything you can to protect against Averis in the coming year? And so this is maybe how we would understand this concept according to Rabbeinu Tam. However, not all of the Rishonim, even Rishonim who had a strong Ashkenazi heritage, not all of them accepted this amendment. The Rosh in the Nedarim, Peragimel Siman Hey, says as follows: Miu nira kiminik hakadmoinim. I disagree. I'm going with the earlier tradition. The Lashon Kol Nidrei moichiach sheniskan al hanedarim she'avra lem b'shana she'avra. If you study the text of Kol Nidrei, you're going to see it's so abundantly clear that it was all past tense. Indeed, there's an entire literature on this issue that if it's not enough just to change the words, that it should say Yom Kippurim zeh ad Yom Kippurim haba aleinu l'tov. You have to go look at all those words, and you have to be good at Aramaic and make sure that all the words Kol Nidrei v'asara Yeshua v'charam de'indarna u'ishtabana. Are you sure that all those words that you're transferring over properly from the past tense to the future tense? And there's been a lot of writing about that issue, and this is what the Rosh is saying. And the Rosh is saying is very, very clear that the origins of this text was past tense, and I'm not a fan of this idea of just coming to change it. Then he says another point. We say v'nislach l'chol adas. Right after Kol Nidrei, we say v'nislach l'chol adas. In other words, we're talking about forgiving something. Forgiving implies there's some wrongdoing here. If it's all about the future, what was the wrongdoing? What's the v'nislach? Nothing happened. If it's about the past year, I made an eder, I was supposed to keep it, I forgot it, I don't know what it is, it's tachan aveirele. Okay, so I'm doing ha'ataras nedarim, but really I'm supposed to be keeping that niggin. So I turn to the Eibishter and I say, v'nislach, please forgive. Forgiveness makes sense in the past tense. If this is about the future year, why are we talking about v'nislach? And so therefore he doesn't understand how the pasuk v'nislach fits in. That's another piece of evidence that originally Kol Nidrei was indeed about the past. Interestingly, the Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch says, Kol Nidrei should be about the future, but he leaves v'nislach there. You ask questions, you need to have charata. You need to have charata. You need to say, had I known, right? You need to, and Kol Nidrei doesn't have charata. Says the Rosh, I'll give you an answer. The answer is, we know everyone has charata. Why? Because they're coming around the table, it's Yom Kippur, people are worried about divine punishment. Yeah, so everyone is essentially saying, had I known that I wouldn't be able to keep this neder from the past, and that means it would lead to divine punishment, I never would have made the neder. And anan sadi is the lashon to use, that there is a regret where the person is saying, had I known X, I would have never gone into it, and therefore that's enough. You need to have shloisha hedyotis. So he feels that the whole community, somehow, I'm saying Kol Nidrei, and everyone says it, and this is where the minute comes that everyone says it. So everyone is saying it. And then the three people next to you, even though they don't say it, but it's as if they're saying mutalach, 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 which is what needs to happen. And so that's good and that's enough. And the chazan, the three people standing around the chazan are doing the same thing. Are these perfect answers to the question? You can debate back and forth. The main thing is the Rosh feels he has something to lean it on, to make it... To substantiate it in halacha. Rabbeinu Tam has his arguments. The Rosh is defending it. Ultimately, the Rosh is going with tradition. the Rabbeinu Tam is breaking with tradition, you understand why. And much has been written about all of these issues, all three of these issues that they're arguing about. What about Rav Papa says, Sarach Lefaret HaNeder, you need to specify the Neder. So the Rosh has an answer, but I don't want to use the Rosh's answer. I want to go back to the Shibolei Aleket's answer, the Psitzki HaRoifa. He says, one second, he says, that you need to be mefaret haneder hani mili kishayoidon. That's only if you know them. We're not having charot on what we know. It's only for the neder that I forgot about. So then the din doesn't apply there. The din of tzarich lefaret haneder is only when you remember. And this is his solution to this particular problem. Let me just conclude this section by saying the result is two traditions about Kol Nidrei. And that's why in these manuscripts over here we see the transfer. Originally these were written in the past tense. But then Rabbeinu Tam, because of Rabbeinu Tam's influence, they were amended to talk about the future, the tense, and then there were some minhagim that did both. The Yavitz, writing way later in the 1700s, says, on the one hand, I cherish Rabbeinu Tam. On the other hand, I cherish the Goinim and the history and the tradition, and so I do both. And he says that he gives a lashon of how he does, that I did swear and that I will swear, that I did promise and that I will promise. From last year, Miyon Kippurim, Sha'avar Ad Yom Kippurim Zeh, or Miyon Kippurim Zeh, Ad Yom Kippurim Abba Leinu L'Toiva, and Atayom, there's different nuschais and how this particular thing is done. Okay. Now, so what did we see so far? Two controversies. Controversy number one, the era of the Goinim, should we be having this? Controversy number two, in the era of the Rishonim, where we do have it, it's a question, is it the past, is it the future? Controversy number three. We did a class a number of months ago, maybe it's more than a year ago already, about the story of the burning of the Talmud in the year 1242. And this was a result of what's sometimes called a disputation that happened in Paris in 1240, though rather than a disputation, it's probably more of like some sort of a tribunal, where Rabbi Yechiel of Paris, one of the Balei HaTosfos, together with other Rishonim, were brought in by the authorities. It was presided over by the queen mother, I think. Her name was Blanche. The king at the time was Louis, King Louis. The city of St. Louis is named for him. Anyway, there was a Jew whose name was Nicholas Donin, and he made accusations against the Gemara. And we looked at some of those accusations and how Rabbi Yechiel defended it in front of this tribunal. One of the things we didn't look at then was this issue of Kol Nidrei. Said Nicholas Donin, in the year 1240. The Jews say, they say on Yom Kippur some sort of device to get out of the oaths that they make Jews swear. And therefore, they make an oath to a non-Jew. Yeah, we're going to go into business. I'm going to pay you by the first of the month, and then they don't pay because they annul their vow. And then he quotes a Gemara in Nedarim. If you don't want your Nedarim in the future year to stand, get up on Yom Kippur. Our Gemara says Rosh Hashanah. Okay, v'yoymar Kol Nidrei, and say Kol Nidrei. Our Gemara doesn't literally say Kol Nidrei, but you get the point. He cited the din that three regular people could annul a vow. And that's why Jews do not keep their oaths that they make to non-Jews. This is obviously a serious accusation. So, Vayan Harav HaYomer. This comes from the one Jewish report that we have from this tribunal. It's not clear who exactly wrote this report. It says as follows: Vasher sha'alta al Kol Nidrei. You asked about Kol Nidrei. Look at the Seifa. We say, this is what we say right after Kol Nidrei, telling you the only vows we're annulling is the ones we can't do it because we forgot and we don't know what they are. When a person is in a matzav of shoigig and they don't have a way of executing their neder, their shvuah, so then taka they have this device. But to lechatchila say that you made a shvuah to a goy and therefore you're not going to pay, and that's off the table. It's only a device that works b'shoigig. Indeed, we saw the earlier sources mentioning that point. Hold on. But there is a din where a person comes in front of a tribunal, one chacham or three adyatis, and said, I made an oath to do such and such. Had I known, I never would have done. So he remembers it, and the guy can say, machalach, 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 and I don't have to keep it. So imagine this. I make an oath, if you go into business with me right now, and you put in a little money, I'm going to make payments to you, and I make a shvuah, and we swear on it, and then I come to my chacham, and I say, had I known that it's going to hurt me so much to pay that person money, I never would have gone into it, and so therefore I don't want to have to pay the person back or whatever it is. And the guy can go, machalach, machalach, because here we know the din is taka, that I could know the neder, and still I could get a atara. Kol Nidrei is only for shaygig, but the way it works when you come in front of a sage is when we know what the neder is. And fet Rabbi Chil, this is only applicable if the oath only is relevant to you and doesn't have bearing on other people. But if a person makes a neder that relates to another person, he makes a neder to another person, ein adam yachal lahafer ella midas chaveroi. Then you need to get permission from that other person. This is the answer that he gave. And this is an external source, meaning it's talking to non-Jews. You also have to look at internal sources where Yidden are writing for themselves how they address this issue. And you see. Reb Tzidkiya Aroifa in the Shibbolei Alaket, he quotes from B'Shem Rabbeinu Tam. Look at the lashon here. The loy mishtare b'chol nidrei shanu oimrim ele nidrei yachid shanadar al atzmai. Kol Nidrei only goes on yourself. Shatalei adavar boy, where it's only about you. Sharei oimer al nafsha sana. That's the deal in the text. You're making the nidarim that are al nafsha sana, that pertain to you, but not the handshake that you made with another person. And he gives an example. He says a shvuas almana. So what's a shvuas almana? An almana, her husband passed away. She now comes to say, I want a ksuba payment. So the Medina Talmud, or Medina, I don't remember if it's Medina Talmud or Medina Goinim, there is a shvuah that she needs to make, that she didn't get payment for a ksuba already. Because she's involved in the estate, we're worried maybe she already collected, so she needs to make the shvuah. So would we say on that type of shvuah, she made a shvuah and then later she could go and annul that vow? Obviously that's not going to work. Or shvuah's loiva v'shomer. Someone borrows money or deposits and we're going to annul a vow. In this, obviously this is not shaykh. Because the rule is, Kol Nidrei only works for things that only require your mind. So if your mind is the only thing necessary to create the vow, then you can remove your mind and say, I didn't really have das, and then the vow is gone. If, however, there are two minds that create this vow, you can remove your mind from today to tomorrow, that other mind is still there, and so therefore the neder is not going to go away. So really it turns out there's two reasons why the accusation was false. One is because the second I make a neder to a non-Jew, it's binding, period. And there is no sugya of ataras nedarim here, number one. Number two is the point that it only works b'shoigeg, where I completely forgot my vow. And there are many other sources of the Rishonim that address that particular issue. The reality is, however, that this was an issue, and Jews were not always trusted for their oaths. And I want to show an interesting example of this. So here on the screen, you have a manuscript that just kind of came to light. And the reason is because it was just sold to the Getty Museum in Los Angeles 2-3 years ago. It's known as the Rothschild Pentateuch, obviously because it was owned by the Rothschilds for a while. It's a chumash written in the year 1299. It has a caliph and a date, a scribe, we have information about it, and has wonderful artwork along the way. They didn't put up the whole manuscript on their website, but about 20 or 30 pages, and it's something special. So obviously, when these images were made available online, so a lot of people went to go look at them. So here's just a typical page that's a regular page, and here of text, and here you'll see has a page with some artwork. What we need to talk about is this page right here, because when you're looking at this page, you'll see that has text. This is a text in Parshas Eikev, and all of a sudden, the text becomes extremely blurry. And here it's blown up a little. The text becomes very, very blurry. And first it looks like, oh, maybe someone erased it, but actually does not look like an erasure at all. It's just, for whatever reason, there's a good few inches over there of text at the end of Parshas Eikev for inexplicable reasons that are extremely faded. So there's a scholar who studies these manuscripts whose name is Mark Epstein. And he was looking at this, and he was very, very curious about this, and he came up with a theory. So the theory goes like this. You have in Here's a book that's called The Jew in the Medieval World by Jacob Rader Marcus. This book, it has primary sources that teach you about Jewish history throughout the ages, and he has over here a text from the 1200s, around the time of this Chumash. This is indeed an oath for Jews, how they shall take an oath. So this is a non-Jewish source saying, how should a Jew who needs to take an oath, no, I already paid you back, and there's a dispute between a Jew and a non-Jew, and it comes before a Gentile court, so they need to make the Jew swear. The problem is the trusting of the Jew. We don't trust that he's swearing properly. So they created this whole elaborate oath, and there are numerous sources that talk about this whole elaborate oath they'd make Jews go through in order to really make sure that they're getting a good shvuah. So it says like this: the Jew shall stand on a sow's skin. A sow is, I think it's a female pig or something like that. And the 5 books of Master Moses shall lie before it. So the Jew is standing on the pig skin, that's like to humiliate him. And he has a chumash, the 5 books of Moshe, shall lie before him, and his right hand up to the wrist shall lie on the book. So his hand, from here till here, needs to be on the book, and he shall repeat after him who administers the oath of the Jews. And now we read what the text of the oath is. Regarding such property of which the man accuses you, the non-Jew accuses you that you owe him a certain property, you know nothing of it, nor do you have it. You never had it in your possession. You do not have it in any of your chests. You have not buried it in the earth, nor locked it with locks. So help you God who created heaven and earth, valley and hill, woods, trees and grass. And so help you the law which God himself created and wrote with his own hand, and gave Moshe on Sinai's mount. And so help you the 5 books of Moses, which he's holding in his hand right here, that you may never more enjoy a bite without soiling yourself. So now it goes into the curses. Like, if you're swearing falsely, here are all the things that you're taking upon yourself. So, and remember, people take this stuff very, very seriously, especially then in the whole society. A curse that you bring upon yourself is something to be really careful about. So you're not going to enjoy a bite without soiling yourself. Who wants to make that oath, that curse for themselves? Then it goes on to say, and may the sulfur and pitch flow down upon your neck that flowed over Sodom and Gomorrah, Sodom and Amorah, and the same pitch that flowed over Babylon flow over you, but 200 times more. And may the earth envelop and swallow you up as it did Dasan and Avira. Okay? So this is the text that you have over here. So now, Epstein theorizes as follows. He says that we see here in the text that the hand was placed on the Tanakh. Where? So you would think it's on the cover, right? And indeed, it could be many times it was on the cover. But go to the actual passage over here. If you go to this passage, what does it say over here? It's in Parshas Eikev. And the lashon of the pasuk is Va'asher asa ledasan u'la'aviram b'nei Eliyav ben Reuven asher patasa ha'aretz es piha va'yivlaim ves batayim ves aleim ves kol hayakum. That's the words in Parshas Eikev. It's talking about the very same thing that the oath was talking about. So he imagines a Jew standing on this pigskin, obviously trembling and sweating, with his hand on that text over and over and over again, may explain why that becomes blotted out. So why is this part of the Kol Nidrei story? Because in a sense, it happens because of the Kol Nidrei, because as we see, Nicholas Donin brings that up in Paris 1240, and then this becomes a thing, and then anti-Semites continue to use it through the centuries, which is why they made these elaborate rituals, and it looks like in this particular case, we have the remnants, we have some of the leftovers of this fear of fearing the Jews' oath. Okay, now, the next part of our story is the following. Kol Nidrei has a little bit of a downturn. Why does it have a downturn? And that's because something else came and took away the attention. And that's Hataras Nedarim. Because the Shalah writes in the Sefer Shnei Luchos HaBris, in the section called Aseres HaDibris, Meseches Yuma, Ner Mitzvah Aleph, he writes, Zrizim Makdim Mitzvah, do it before Rosh Hashanah. Mamish, like the Gemara said. The Gemara said, yeah, Bereish Hashanah. So better do it before, and Zrizim Makdim Mitzvah. And so what happens? So Shalah suggests that a person do both and do them right on Erev Rosh Hashanah. And that leads to Hataras Nedarim. This is where the minhag of Hataras Nedarim starts. Where in the first paragraph, what do? We ask for Hatara for the past. and we are sitting in front of 3 or 10 people. So we have our bezdin. We say that we're mischaret, meikara, had I known. We have that lashon baked in. Had I known, I never would have done it. I don't remember what they are. So Rabinheim, I can't delineate them. When you can't, we saw that it's okay. So we do that. And then the bezdin answers. That's the first thing. Then we stay standing and we do the next thing. We do a maidah. That's for the future year. So we do Rabbeinu Tam's Kol Nidrei. First we do the Go'inim's Kol Nidrei. Then we do Rabbeinu Tam's Kol Nidrei. And it's taka true. That doesn't need a response. A maidah doesn't need a response. A maidah doesn't need a response. The response is for a different issue. And that's because I can't get too far into this. There used to be a third thing that was called a nidui. And that is that the person would go and sit on the floor, and he would say that if min hashamayim I'm in nidui for doing this avera, that avera, so then he behaves like he's in nidui, he's sitting on the floor, and he takes his shoes off, so now he's in nidui. And then the bezin says, kulam yu mutar lach, kulam yu muchar lach, en kan loy nidui. In other words, there's the third thing that's going on. And there was this whole seder of a text of putting yourself into nidui that was said. And then Minhag Chabad came not to say that, but we still have that final paragraph there. So that final paragraph is actually not a response to the Maidah. It's a third thing. It has nothing to do with the Maidah. It has to do with the Nidui. So really, our Atar Sandarim is doing 3 things. Number 1 is doing the Go'inim's Kol Nidrei. Number 2 is doing Rabbeinu Tam's Kol Nidrei. Number 3, we're doing a Nidui that the Shalah here talks about. You put yourself in Nidui, you behave like you're in Nidui, then the 10. That's why you need an Eidah Shlema. You don't need 10 people for the Neder. You only need the 10 people for the nidui. When you want to say, if someone's in a nidui, min hashamayim, the Gemara says that you need to have 10 people to get you out. Because if God put you in nidui, you need God to take you out. 10 people is Eidah Shleim, but that is a Shechina, so then it's Al Derech Hashem, and then that's enough to get you out. So we don't put ourselves in nidui, but it looks like Minhag Chabad is to still have the 10 take you out of the nidui, which is why you have the 10. It seemed to me that people need to know this, because if you don't know this, then the 10 people aren't having in mind what they're saying, and they're not taking you out of a nidui, so then that whole final paragraph isn't effective. But anyway, that's another shear for another time. The bottom line is, how does this impact Kol Nidrei? Well, all of a sudden, Kol Nidrei is now extra. It's superfluous. I don't need it anymore, because I took it. It is a Magdim Mitzvah. I took care of it early. So the Yavitz Taka says, we don't really need it anymore. So why do we do it? Minik shehukba, hukba. That's the lashon of the Yavitz and Shilas Yavitz in Siman Kuf Mem Hey. So that's the bottom line. So really, Kol Nidrei, even despite all of the debates about it, at least before Hatar Sandarim, it was still doing something. And now suddenly it's not really doing anything because only there because of the tradition. In a sense, go back to those rabbi sermons that we started off with, and there we said they asked why this, and it's so legalistic, and why to start. Now you can even make the question stronger. We're not even doing anything. It was all taken care of already. We're only doing Mishum HaMinik. Okay, so what was their answer? So their answer was the Marranos, and I told you about that before. So whenever you hear this type of thing, it's always, I think it's a good thing if you're able to try to trace. Where does this theory of the Marranos come from? So what we saw so far is in a Sefer, you had an Oitzer Minhagei Yeshurim from Rabbi Avram Eliezer Hirschowitz, and he was quoting it from Likutei Tzvi, and he doesn't want to tell us who Likutei Tzvi is, essentially. He doesn't want to tell us who this author is. Okay, so I'll tell you who this author of Likutei Tzvi is, but give me a second. Who's the first person to talk about Kol Nidrei associated with the Marranos? Because all of the sources that we looked at, nothing about Marranos. The conversation is in Pavel, nothing very far away from Spain, and there is no knowledge, not in the Gaonim and not in the Rishonim, about anything to do with Marranos. It doesn't come up. Now, it doesn't mean it's not true. I'm just saying it doesn't appear in any of those earlier sources. Hold on. So we need where are the first sources that talk about it? Okay, so last time I gave this shir, we traced it back to an article in Hamelitz, which was a Russian newspaper in 1866. And this person wrote in this article in Hamelitz in 1866, he developed this theory, but he says that he saw it in a book that was printed in 1860. And last time I didn't have access to the book, but with the help of Mendel Konnikov, he helped me identify this book. So here's the title page of the book. It's written by a man named Leon Mandelstam. Now I hope for some of you that name rings a bell, because a few weeks ago we did a shir for the Siyum Rambam. and he's the one who produced a reformed version of Mishnah Torah Rambam, where the things that didn't really align with his worldview came out of the book. He was a maskil. He was a maskil during the 19th century. He took over Lilienthal, which was part of the program of reforming education in Russia. When Lilienthal left and came to America, Leon Mandelstam took over, and he published numerous books, etc. So here you have in German, Biblical and Talmudic Studies, published in the year 1860. And within this book, one of the essays is called Reform in Judentum, Reform in Judaism. And he has an essay that starts here that is called Kol Nidrei. What does he say here in this essay called Kol Nidrei? He asks the questions, some of the problems that are associated with the text that we speak about, including the question that we opened with. Why this? The beginning of Yom Kippur, how does this make sense? He also speaks about the fact that Yom Kippur, Kol Nidrei makes him uncomfortable, because in his enlightened worldview, when there should be no way of annulling a vow is a vow, there should be no workaround to this whole concept and this whole idea. And so he comes along and he suggests that this Marrano theory. Now, because it's written in German, I couldn't understand every single word that he was saying using the translating systems that were there. So I wasn't sure if he identify it in the 15th century, the 16th, or the 14th century. I couldn't figure out exactly where he was talking, or maybe he was talking earlier. But he clearly is talking about Spain, and then he develops the whole theory, and he says, now in Germany, we live in a very enlightened place. The government doesn't force us to do anything that's anti-Jewish, so the whole need for Kol Nidrei isn't necessary anymore, and therefore we should stop saying Kol Nidrei. So this is the source. There is no earlier source that talks about any link between Marranos and Kol Nidrei before our good friend Leon Mandelstam in 1860 over here, as part of his discomfort with it and his advocacy that we should get rid of it. Now, how do you bridge from here to the Oitzer Kol Minhagei Yeshurim book that we saw before? So this is in 1860. Now, next here on the right-hand side of the screen, there's a picture of a man named Eliezer Tzvi Tzveifel. Eliezer Tzvi Tzveifel was also a maskil. There's actually a letter of the Fidik Rebbe where he says that he was once in Lubavitch. I don't know what the circumstances were, but he says that Tzveifel was in Lubavitch. He wrote numerous books. He was a historian. In 1866, so that's 60 years after Mandelstam published his Marrano theory, he prints a book called Lekutei Tzvi. Here's a copy from the Rebbe's library. It's the writings of another maskil by the name of Tzvi Hir Segal. Tzvi Hir Segal passed away, left writings unpublished, and their family asked, or maybe the person, maybe Segal himself before he passed away asked, I don't remember, asked Tzveifel if he can publish his writings, and he did, and he published this book. It's not too big. It's the musings of this Tzvi Hir Segal on Pirkei Avos, on Tehillim, on Psukim, all interesting ideas. And at the end of the book, we get this. I don't want to leave some empty space. I'm going to write here an essay. I'm going to present here an essay. Who's writing? It seems that this is Tzveifel writing. In other words, Tzveifel is saying, I finished this book, I have something to say as well, so I'm going to add it. And this is in 1866, so presumably he's writing it sometime around the publishing time in 1866. All the way at the end, it's mamish the last time. I'm going to read you the paragraph he has here in this book, Eliyahu Tzvi Tzveifel. You look at text 1 that comes from Avram Eliezer Hershowitz while I'm reading it. So he says here as follows. Tam lahanegino hamu'utzeves leiv v'hameda'eves ruach shamenagnim ba milois Kol Nidrei. The reason for this sad and inspirational, motivational niggin that we say Kol Nidrei, she'ein ba shum inyan she'yor atos v'yagin. There's nothing in this niggin that really should make us sad. Hulufi sha'anusim sha'yu boim b'seiser b'ma'ares b'yem ha'kippurim li'spalo. The Marranos, they used to hide in the caves to daven. Hoyu niskarim b'shas amiras Kol Nidrei. They would remember during the time of Kol Nidrei shvuoseihem v'nidreihem shenishbu v'shenadru lishar badas, that they're going to remain loyal Christians. Shebe'emes loy matu ba koiras ruach klal. And really they weren't happy about this. They wanted to negate and nullify all of those oaths. And so they felt really bad remembering that they made these pledges against Daitam V'cheneged Ritzonim. And indeed, there's a remnant where we say al das habezdin im havaryonim. We mentioned that we're davening with the avaryonim, and that's telling you that you're davening with the anusim. So Tzveifel is writing this at the end of this book in 1866. It's a few years after Mandelstam. There's no doubt that he saw Mandelstam, and he wrote this in here very, very briefly without crediting Mandelstam as well. And so there we have it. Why? Because he wrote Likutei Tzvi. What's the title of this book? This title of this book, Tzvi Hirsch-Segal's writing, edited by Eliezer Tzvi HaKohen Tzveifel, is called Likutei Tzvi. And what are Tzveifel's dates? He was born in Moilov in the year 1815, and he died in Glukov in 1888. And so Avram Eliezer Hershowitz is basically doing this. He's doing wink, wink, wink. If you know, you know. Okay? If you know, you know, but I can't tell you. And the reason is, because this is a sefer that's supposed to be a traditional sefer. He has a haskama from Yisrael Khan Inspector. He has a haskama from Shlomo HaKohen of Vilna. And as a result of that, he can't just write an idea that's coming from Tzveifel or an idea that's coming from Mandelstam. I don't know if he knew Mandelstam, but he definitely knew Tzveifel, and he's quoting it. So he gives you the basic obscure information. If you know enough, then you figured it out. If not, not. The bottom line is it ends up in a sefer, and these are your three pillars for this story. Leon Mandelstam is pillar number 1. Eliezer Tzvi HaKohen Tzveifel is pillar number 2, and Avram Eliezer Hershowitz, for those unfamiliar with these Maskilic writings, it enters through Avram Eliezer Hershowitz, and that's like the Orthodox channel. And the bottom line is, this is where many of the rabbis have developed this sermon and this idea. So if this doesn't kill this Marrano theory, then I don't know what will, because it's something that does not go away. Literally new content, new videos, new drushes, one way or another. But people will realize, okay, you can't say it's from the Marranos in the 1500s, because obviously we have sources earlier. So the theory just bounces. Okay, so it's not that. The Marranos, they appreciated it more than regular. Okay, go disprove that. You can't disprove that. But when you see where the thing came from, then you understand Meikara, that the whole thing is really a serious stretch. Or likewise, the conversation of moving, okay, so it wasn't Spain. It was some other persecution in some other country at some other place. Yeah, I think you understand what I'm saying. Now, the shaila is if we have some more time, because, yeah, we do. We have a few more minutes. We need to do what Chassidus says about Kol Nidrei, because we need something inspiring. You need something inspiring? So don't worry, Chassidus actually gives very inspiring ideas about Kol Nidrei. There's specifically 2 ideas that we're going to look at in Chassidus, one from Likutei Torah and one from Eira Torah. Before I should point it out, I just want to highlight. It is true, however, that the idea that the message of the Marranos applies to all of us, that's a true idea. There's a letter of the Rebbe where the Rebbe writes that just like the story of the Marranos, so that we're all Marranos in a certain sense. So I don't want to take that away. That's very true, but we just have to use that in the right time and at the right place. So what does Chassidus say about Kol Nidrei? So there's a Maimer in Likutei Torah, Parshas Matos. This was brought to my attention by Rabbi Eli Silberstein in Ithaca. So the Tzemach Tzedek here is writing. It looks like the Tzemach Tzedek. It doesn't look like this part's on the Alter Rebbe. We're dealing here with what is Hafaras Nedarim according to Chassidus. Says the Tzemach Tzedek in the Maimer as follows: the bas, the girl, is the neshama. It's the neshama. The neder, the girl makes a neder. So now all of a sudden the girl can't eat the Danish because she made a neder. So the neshama can't engage in certain things. What does it mean the neshama can't engage in certain things? The neshama is in galus. The neshama is in a body. The neshama isn't so strong. It can't break through the shackles of the nefesh ha'amis and the guf. And so just like the girl who made a neder can't eat the Danish, the neshama within the body can't get what he wants in terms of Torah and mitzvahs, a relationship with God, because he's also bound, so to speak, by a neder. Comes the father in Parshas Matos. And what does he do? He's mevatel the neder, no neder. What's the father represent? The father represents Ava Rabbah, deep, passionate love for the Eibishter. When a neshama achieves a deep, passionate love for the Eibishter, all of a sudden, the neshama gets what it wants. It's not bound and shackled anymore. There's no neder anymore. Just like the girl now could eat the Danish because the father was mevatel the neder, so too now the neshama could have the spiritual experience that it's looking for because the Ava Rabbah that it achieved got rid of the limitations on the nefesh habahamis. This is what the Maimer says. And then the last few lines of number 15, he says, Yesh loymar, sha'afaras nedarim biyoyim HaKippurim, when we annul the vows on Yom Kippur, hainu, what do we mean by doing this? Shal yedei hatshuva, nimshach bechinas hafaras, uvitul hakishurim, vigiloy ha'ava rabba benefesh. Kol Nidrei is the perfect shidduch with the Yom Kippur. Why? Because what does Yom Kippur do? Yom Kippur is such a lofty day, such a special day. There's a tshuva that we do on this day. What that does, it frees the neshama. It takes away all the knots where the neshama was tied down in the dorim that didn't allow it to self-express, that didn't allow it to have true, authentic spiritual experience, that didn't allow it to have all of that. That goes away. When? It goes away on Yom Kippur. Why? Because of the tshuva that we do. So it's a perfect shidduch. Exactly what the whole concept of Hafaras Nedarim is, that's what Yom Kippur is all about. Hafaras HaNeder is, the neshama wants a spiritual experience, it's tied down, it can't. That's what Yom Kippur is. Yom Kippur is the tshuva to allow the neshama to achieve what this spiritual experience that it's looking for. And so therefore, that's why we do this Hafaras Nedarim on Yom Kippur. Now obviously, the way I understand this and similar passages, the nigla remains, the pshutai remains, the simple legal formula remains. But everything has a spiritual source, everything has a spiritual counterpart, something in avodah, and this is the deeper meaning and the deeper, what's happening on a deeper level is this type of concept. There is another idea in a maimer of Eir HaTorah. This is an Eir HaTorah Matis, where the Samach Tzedek elaborates on the following idea. I'm going to try to summarize it quickly, and with this we're going to conclude. What's a neder is verbalized. You can't make a neder without verbalizing. You have to speak. Speech. How you mevatel the neder? You're mevatel the neder by going to a chacham. Chacham is chachma, that's higher than speech, but that's not enough. You also have to say, I never really wanted it. You have to have charata. You have to remove your ratzin from the speech. When you remove your ratzin from the speech, that does hafaras haneder. So he says, there's also hafaras haneder l'mayla. What does this mean? God spoke. What did God speak? God said that a person should not eat tray for food, and a person should not be mechal al Shabbos. All the 630 mitzvahs is God's speech. Okay, a person violated it. What's he supposed to do now? You're stuck. So hold on a second. When a person said a neder, speech, they're not stuck. There's something higher that can get rid of it. What's the higher that gets rid of it? So let's focus on the detail of you have charata, which means you remove your ratzon from it. So he says the same thing is with Lamaila. Yes, it is true Hashem said, I don't want you to eat not kosher food. However, that's not the etzem of Hashem. That's Hashem as he lowered himself into the realm of Torah with these particular rules. What's Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur is, just like Hafaras Nedarim is, you go to the ratzon that's higher than speech, and you remove the ratzon from the speech, because you say, had I known, I never would have wanted, and now, when you strip the ratzon out of the speech, the neder goes away. So too, although a yid did an aveira, and that goes against what it says, the speech of God, hold on, I could go deeper than the speech of God. I could go to ratzon, and that's what Yom Kippur is about, in the lashon of Kabbalah, it's hamshachas hakeser. I could go to that higher level, and from there we have this language of there is no pgam. That's such a high level where the actions that we do don't have a negative effect l'mayla. The lower level of elikus, there we do impact negatively, and there it's almost like there's no rectification possible. But when you go to the ratzon, when you tap into keser, that higher level, so then you restore the relationship, because Hashem says, I'm the mucker of the speech, so I said that you shouldn't do that. Yeah, okay, but I transcend that, and so therefore I'm able to give you a Pesach for tshuva that you should be able to return. And he goes on and explains this idea at greater length, and then we'll read and conclude with the following paragraph. Im kain lefi ze yesh loymar the inyan minig amiras kol nidrei shayich leinyan hamechila uslicha. There is a deep relationship between the forgiveness on Yom Kippur and with the kol nidrei of Yom Kippur. Because just like we're mater neder, al yedei ze nimshach mida toiva merubei mena, on that brings us a great benefit, that God is going to forgive us for the sins. So the common denominator between both of them is that the Tzemach Tzedek shows you that if you study well the theme of what Yom Kippur is, and you study well the theme of what Ataras Nadarim is, you'll see that there's a perfect link and there's a perfect match between the two, so much so that it's very befitting for it to start off Yom Kippur, and it's very befitting for it to be, he doesn't say this, I'm adding it, very befitting that it should be done in a tune, and a serious tune, because indeed it is much more than a basic legal formula, b'frat, that we already took care of the legal stuff at Rosh Hashanah. It's much more than that. What it is deep material that conveys in a very profound way what Yom Kippur is all about. Good.